You can't yell fire in a theater. You can't yell bomb on a plane. And no, Puppet, you can't go to a pool and yell shark either. Oh, wait, we're on.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Maybe I'm hosting, maybe Sleeka's talking to the puppet. Not that certain tonight, but I'm welcome to the Hoops HD Report, our weekly college basketball video cast here from Hoops HD, where we talk all things going on in college basketball. I'm your host, Chad Sherwood. Joining me over there is David Griggs over there, Matt Zakowski, and down below we've got John Teitel and John Stalika. And we are recording this as we watch the Alabama-Clemson National Championship game in football. And since all of you are watching this tomorrow, we're going to give you live updates on the game because that makes perfect sense. Teitel, we got an update on the game. Any news?
Alabama up 7-0 early. The defense looks stout. I'm predicting an Alabama win, but who isn't?
And for those of you that maybe could watch it tomorrow, if you didn't watch it tonight, you should be watching this game on ESPNU because Bill Walton is dressed incredibly right now.
Yes, it's an amazing outfit. I want to get an outfit like that for Chad.
In fact, on next week's podcast, one of us may be dressed like that. We will find out.
Chad, if you dress like that for court, I will forever respect you.
I may not have a license anymore, but anyhow, what we want to do tonight is we are going to go through each of the major conferences, discuss some of the events that have occurred both on and off the court, as well as preview some of the upcoming games. We are also going to be making our other topic as we go through each of these conferences tonight be who is the biggest surprise in each conference and who is the biggest disappointment. But before we get to any of that, David, we have two remaining undefeated teams left in the nation now, including Baylor, the number one team in the nation as of today for the first time ever. And the other one is the Zags, of course. Let me throw out the first question there. Which one of them falls first?
Baylor. And it isn't so much that I don't think they're as good as Gonzaga. Truth be told, I don't think they are, although I am really big on this Baylor team. But their road is just so much more rocky. Whereas Gonzaga has a few speed bumps to get over, St. Mary's, at BYU. Baylor has some brick walls to get through. Kansas, that's just a top-flight conference. And I'm almost kind of expecting Gonzaga to win out. In fact, it's not that unusual. We saw Kentucky do it one year. We saw Wichita State do it the year before. I wouldn't shock me at all if Gonzaga entered the tournament without a loss. It would bowl me over if Baylor were able to do that.
Well, Wichita State would be the better comparison here. I mean, we give the SEC grief for being a cupcake among a major, but it's still much more major than what the West Coast Conference would be.
Yeah.
And John T., this Baylor team has come a long way in the last 14 years, haven't they?
It's amazing. I mean, they were literally on the crime blotter back in 2003 with one teammate murdering another teammate. You can't write this stuff. And then 2017, they are now the top-ranked team in the entire nation. You have to give a ton of credit, of course, to Coach Drew as well as the players. I want to give credit to the athletic department, but after seeing the whole football thing, I don't know if that's deserved. But kudos to Coach Drew. Unbelievable effort.
And if we're talking about undefeated teams, Matt, I think we got to turn a very quick attention to the bottom of D1. There is one remaining team, thanks to a home loss to Alabama A&M over the weekend. One remaining team without any wins whatsoever, Mississippi Valley State. Also a slight notch, North Carolina A&T. The only other team winless against D1 opponents, having actually lost today again at home to Maryland Eastern Shore. Matt, you think they can go winless?
I'll still say because of their league, they'll sneak a win or two out.
Yeah, in fact, they're playing Alabama State tonight, another a 3-12 team, so they may not even be winless by the time people are watching this podcast. But we may be giving our centenary award for the worst team to somebody with a couple of wins by the end of the season, the way things are going. But let's go ahead. I want to pull up some standings right here, potentially, if I can get this button to work. And we should
Chat.
see coming up on the screen right now
Chat's
is the
computer
Big
not
12
working.
standings. Of course, I did not want to start in the Big 12. I want to start in the ACC, so ignore that and let's go here. This is the current ACC standings as of 8:45 p.m. on January 9th. And I put on the website today my proposed bracket as of the end of games last night, the beginning of games today. And I went out on a bit of a limb here and put Florida State as a number 1 seed. You're sitting here, though, at 15-1 with some very good wins, including the win at Virginia, and they beat Virginia Tech this week. David, do you think I was crazy?
No, I really don't. Well, I think you're crazy, but not because of this. Truth be told, it's a little bit higher than I would have had them. I had them on my 2 line when we did our bracket rundown toward the end of last week, and I thought you all thought I was crazy. But no, it's not. They have 1 loss. They have 1 really good win at Virginia. That's a pop win. That's a road win against a likely protected seed, which the number 1 seeds typically end up with at least 1. They have other notable wins against Florida and Minnesota, who are looking pretty good. And their only loss, not to downplay it, was by 3 points to, not a very good Temple team, but to a Temple team that had a hell of a weekend. This is a really good team. You could certainly make a case that they belong on the 1 line right now.
Yeah, and Tytel, I've just pulled up this Florida State profile on the screen here. If you look by RPI, that's 2 top 5 wins, although I don't know that Minnesota is really the number 5 team in the nation. But you actually got a chance to see this team at that tournament that Temple somehow won amazingly.
I did not actually go to that
I'm
tournament.
sorry, you're not at that tournament. I apologize. I got my tournaments mixed up, but go ahead anyhow.
I saw them beat GW by 1,000,000 points in
Yeah.
DC at the BB&T Classic.
That's the one.
No problem. They looked unstoppable, and they did that without their star freshman, Jonathan Isaac, who was out with a strained hip flexor. They have an amazing resume, and it's number 1 caliber. It's just today I can't see them getting in over both undefeated teams. I can't see them getting in over Villanova. And while you can make the argument with Kansas and Kentucky, I just don't think they're there yet. Like, it's a good argument. And in a couple of weeks, if they keep dominating in the ACC, they will be there. I just think it's a little early to put them on the 1 line right now.
Well, beyond that, Matt, let me bring you in here. The other thing I had in my bracket I released today was I had 6 ACC teams as protected seeds among the top 4 lines. Is that something that we could be looking at when you look at the strength of this conference?
I'll say 5. I think you're going to have a lot there. One of them will probably play out, and then you probably have, of these other 5, maybe you'll see 2 of them on the 4 line. But I do think you're going to see a whole heap of ACC teams, not just in, but in as protected seeds.
Okay. Well, we did see North Carolina have a pretty good week going 2-0. And David, after they not only took care of Clemson in overtime, but then they did something to North Carolina State that I don't think has ever been done before yesterday.
It was, I mean, again, they had to, some of their bye games put up better fights than that. I mean, they just completely took them apart.
And Stalika, Clemson, on the other hand, a team that we've talked about as a potential bubble team, losing not only to Carolina but to Notre Dame this week. Do you think that that's going to hurt the Tigers' chances, or do you think they're still okay?
I don't think it's going to hurt the Tigers as far as getting in the NCAA, but if you look at their schedule, they've missed on 3 opportunities to really enhance their resume. I mean, they had Xavier at a time when they were vulnerable, but couldn't pull off that win in Orlando. North Carolina was a missed opportunity, which actually got chippy at the end of the game if you saw Brad Brownell and Roy Williams handshake. But Clemson also got out to a big lead against Notre Dame on the road, but we're not able to finish that one either. So are we going to be talking about missed opportunities at the end of the year for Clemson?
Well, John T., when I'm looking at these standings right here, and I know it's very early in conference season, so things can be kind of skewed. You see here number 5 currently at 2-1 after beating both Miami and Pittsburgh this week, Syracuse. What do we make of this after they looked so awful up until this week?
We make nothing of it. If you can explain the Syracuse season, you're a better man than I. I mean, it literally went 10 games in a row, win-loss, 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 win-loss. I mean, no good team or bad team should be doing that because you're either good enough to beat most of the 10 or bad enough to lose to most of the 10, and certainly not to go on a roller coaster back and forth. It doesn't make any sense to me. I watched the first half of the Pitt game. They went on a ridiculous run. It was over. It was 40-12, I think, midway through the first half, and I turned it off because I had better things to do on a Saturday. Really, really weird team. I can't explain it.
David, do you have an explanation for this? I mean, blowing out a Miami team and taking care of Pitt fairly easily as well. Two teams, though, that we're looking at as possible tournament teams here. After you lose to Boston College, you lose to St. John's, you lose to UConn.
Yeah, those three teams right there. And I know UConn is a brand name, but to lose to Boston College, St. John's, and UConn this year is – you're talking missing the NIT by a few hundred miles. And then on the other end, they had the big wins. I mean, I don't think there's any profile that ranges top to bottom as drastically as this one does. I mean, it's the most schizophrenic profile I've ever seen up to this point. Now, we're not to the end yet. We still have a very long way to go, and it could even out one way or another, but their ceiling is very high and their floor is very low, it seems. And it isn't just that they lost to the Johnnies. They got absolutely blown out of the place. I'm with Titel on this one. I can't explain it other than to say that it's an inexplicably schizophrenic year that they're having.
Matt, you want to bring up a comment on them?
Yeah, I actually do. Is like one thing of their recent play. Boeheim just cut his rotation down from 9 to 6, and I think he's just going to ride or die. It looks like with Tyus Battle, John Gillen, and Andrew White in the backcourt, and then Tyler Lydon, Tyler Roberson. Oh, and what other? Forgot the other guy, but yeah, like he cut out DeJuan Coleman, Pasquale Chukwu, and Frank Howard from the rotation, and I think that might just be. He's played short rotations before. This might be his most extreme, but that might be. You've cut guys who clearly weren't performing, and they maybe just these 6 might be enough to at least get them in the tournament.
Well, we might find out coming up this week, but before we take a look at the rest of these games coming up this week, actually, I want to bring up one other team, and Sleeka, let me bring you up here because they're one of your favorite teams, and that's the North Carolina State Wolfpack. I think that we actually were discussing that before we even went on the air, whether or not this team is any good or not, especially after what North Carolina did to them.
No, it's certainly been the best of times and the worst of times for the Wolfpack during the past week. I mean, they did get a nice blowout win at home against Virginia Tech, who could probably use a road win in the ACC themselves to really legitimize their profile. I mean, I understand they were thrown out of kilter a little bit for 24 hours because they were supposed to play North Carolina on Saturday, but to not even show up in a game that's usually very close, even when NC State is not that good, that does not look good for their long-term chances. But if you look at their upcoming schedule, they go to Boston College and then they host Georgia Tech. They better win those 2 games if they want to stay within shouting distance of Chad's bracket or any other bracket for that matter.
Let's take a quick look at some of the upcoming games here. We see the column of them here starting Tuesday night. A big one here is Duke, Florida State. Honestly, it's tough to go through any week in the ACC with a lot of big games. We also see Duke, Louisville, Virginia, Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina. Titel, let me start with you. What game are you looking forward to, or maybe games this week in the ACC?
I think this is the Duke, without Coach K week. They have Grayson Allen back until something else happens with him. Tuesday at Florida State, Saturday at Louisville. We are going to see exactly what this Duke team is made of. I think I saw a report today. Anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, that Emil Jefferson might be hurt. So wouldn't come at a worse time because both those teams have a lot of size. But I think it's going to be all Duke all week.
And if those 2 teams look familiar, that's also because those were the 2 games last year at Cameron in which the tripping incidents actually took place. So Florida State and Louisville fans will be lying in wait for this one.
Yeah. David, I know you love discussing Grayson Allen, so I'll let you discuss what I think is probably the other really good game coming up this weekend, Florida State, North Carolina.
Yeah, and again, you had them on the one line. If they get this one, it will have verified your pick. Not to say that they absolutely can't get it without it, but this is a one seed caliber win going to North Carolina and winning. So we'll see what they can do there. And even if they don't win, how are they going to play? I mean, can they go in there and at least compete? Because that place has been brutal to opponents this year.
Let's move over to the Big East. If we can get the right screen up here, not the Big 12. There we go. Big East, where Xavier sitting here. Sleek, I got to bring you in. They're your team, 3-0 in first place of the conference, and a little bit of news coming out for the Musketeers this week as well about Miles Davis.
Yeah, what happened was after they beat St. John's, they announced that Miles Davis had finished the conditions of his reinstatement, and he was eligible to practice as early as Sunday, but I don't see him getting really significant minutes, not just yet, but this is also going to be their first real gauntlet of the season. They go to Villanova, which they've struggled mightily in their first 3 tries, and then they go on the road to Butler on Saturday, and then 48 hours later we'll have a home game against Creighton. So Xavier will be put to the test for the first time this year.
Matt, let me turn to you here because you're the Marquette guy, and you just got to see Marquette play Villanova this weekend. Don't want to rub it in too much, but Villanova did go 1-1 this week. In fact, losing to Butler and then beating Marquette. Is it still the best team of the nation? Is that what you saw this weekend?
I think it is, and one of these 9 teams had to play Nova after a loss. They weren't going to probably go all year undefeated. Close, but why did that have to be Marquette?
John T., the other team I want to bring up here, though, is this Butler team. They actually had a very nice week, actually, not only being Villanova, and then although struggled, they did get the win over Georgetown as well. How good is this Butler team?
I was going to say, I don't know what game you were watching, but an overtime win over Georgetown does not qualify as a good win, I assure you. Villanova win, obviously amazing with the court storming. Amazing resume. They have 2 losses on the road by a combined 4 points. Sadly, they're to Indiana State and St. John's, but wins over half the Pac-12 with Arizona and Utah, Indiana and Cincinnati back-to-back in the summer. Really, really solid resume. We will see exactly what they're made of this week. Wednesday at Creighton, Saturday hosting Xavier. If they can sweep those 2 games this week, I mean, talk about a team in line for a 1 seed. You have to give them a lot of credit for that.
And if you're keeping track, that was a $5,000 fine for rushing the floor for Butler, although they actually made a charitable donation to, I think, a foundation that's similar to, related to Andrew Smith. I forget what the name of it is at the moment.
And David, I know your official job here is to make sure I don't screw things up, and I already did tonight because we're supposed to be discussing surprises and disappointments in each conference, and we totally forgot to do that with the ACC. So what I'd like to do is go through each of you here real quick on the Big East with that question, then we'll backtrack to the ACC for that and do this going forward. But David, let me ask you, what is the biggest surprise and the biggest disappointment so far for what you've seen in the Big East this year?
Well, I would say Butler is the biggest surprise, but I wasn't surprised because I said before the year that I thought they were going to be pretty good. The biggest surprise probably isn't all that big. At least to me, it was how good Providence looked out of conference. Now, they've looked very bad since conference play started, but considering everything that they lost, I was just amazed that they were as successful as they were prior to conference play beginning.
Okay. Matt, do you have a biggest disappointment for the Big East so far?
Oh, I do. They're in Washington, D.C., and I thought going into this version of the Big East, I thought there were 3 flagship programs. One is clearly Bennett, Villanova. Marquette, not Bennett, but showing a slow sign of recovery. And then there's Georgetown, which looks like typical affairs in Washington, D.C. these days, a mess.
Let me jump back to the ACC here, and John T., let me bring you in here. Is Florida State the biggest surprise in the ACC, or something else?
we're talking about a team that hasn't made the tournament since 2012, and you want to give them a 1 seed? Yeah, I think they are the big surprise.
Okay. Slika, do you have a biggest disappointment from the ACC?
It's kind of tough to pick one out of this group, but I would probably say Virginia, given the level of play that we've become accustomed to seeing the past few years. I mean, yes, they did win at Louisville, but this is a team that usually holds serve at home, and losing games like West Virginia and Florida State, those are games they usually would have won in the past, but not this year.
Okay, now that we've got that taken care of with those two conferences, just some key upcoming games in the Big East. The big one, of course, is tomorrow night, Xavier at Villanova. Also Xavier at Butler, and then they're hosting Creighton. So, Sleeka, your team has a hell of a next 3 games coming up over the course of the next week. You ready for it?
Yep. I mean, I guess as a diehard, I could easily say 3-0, but realistically, I think they actually have a shot at going 2-1 here. I like their matchup against Butler, although the matchup against Creighton does scare me a bit, but I still think they win that one at home.
I agree.
David, the biggest game, though, the Big East schedule, I had to put it in here Saturday. What do you think about this Truman State at Creighton game?
I was unaware that those two were playing until just now. I think that's absurdly ridiculous. Why would you schedule what is going on with that? We need to, Stalika, you're a Big East guy. What the hell is going on with that?
Well, if you look at some of the other games, I see Georgetown is hosting UConn, so that probably gave Creighton a bit of an opening.
Oh, it freed up that opportunity to play Truman State.
Yeah, there's a non-conference game there, Georgetown and UConn, coming up on Saturday also. Old Big East matchup that nobody should watch. Let's move over to the Big Ten Conference. And, Taita, let me start off with you here. Purdue knocked off Wisconsin in one of the biggest games of the weekend in the Big Ten. Was that the biggest game?
It was. These teams are right at the top of the conference. Minnesota is trying to get there. I think they're semi-fraudulent at the moment, but we'll see. Great win and very hard-fought game. I hope that people got to watch it. It's 2 pair of top 20 teams going at it on a weekend. Very physical, lots of foul calls. Swanigan was great. He had a ton of turnovers, unfortunately. But he's a double-double machine. And I expect both these teams – look like second weekend March teams.
Well, you mentioned Minnesota being a fraud. Matt, let me bring you in here. Do you think this Minnesota team is a fraud? They did pick up a nice one over Northwestern this week.
Actually, no, I do not. And I think the one thing that they have that I think kind of separates them, Reggie Lynch. Like, man, is my second team being Illinois State, given my mom was an alum. I kind of followed the Redbirds, and when he left, I'm like, oh, no. And then didn't think as much because sometimes when you transfer up, you never know how they translate. He's been an absolute monster on the interior for Minnesota. They have a nice backcourt with Amir Coffey, Dupree McBrayer, and Nate Mason. And then, Jordan Murphy, nice garbage man 4 that does a little everything. And quietly, Little P has a pretty good lineup there and a pretty good team.
I think I'm on board with you, and I have not been on board with little Ricky Pitino, as we've called him for a while. As I seem to have lost my screen here, but I think we're still going.
No, it's still on.
Okay. Okay, David, let me ask you then. Michigan State loses to Penn. Just when we thought they were back, they go ahead and they lose to Penn State. What's going on here?
Well, I guess they're not as back as we thought they were. Really, I don't know what to make, because I thought they had finally gotten it ironed out, and you just kind of dismissed some of their early struggles as having a brutal schedule with a young team. They had won, I think, 6 out of 7, and then they go lose at Penn State. It's like, well, now those 2 losses are Penn State and Northeastern at home. So it's kind of a hard team to figure. I think they're going to, kind of shore it up enough to get enough wins to get into the NCAA tournament, maybe as a 9 or a 10 seed. And then I think they're going to advance to the Final Four, which is what Michigan State seems to do.
Okay. And Sleeka, let me bring in here one other team, as I've kind of a little bit of computer program, so I can't quite change our screen yet. But Maryland beats Michigan this week, and this is another team that I've been kind of on the fence on. Are they good or are they not? Do you think this is really a good Maryland team?
Well, they did have a bit of a blip on the radar if you saw the end of their game against Nebraska, but even with their win against Michigan, that's probably saying more about the Wolverines right now than it is about the Terrapins, who seem to have held serve for the most part, with Pitt being the other notable exception. What's funny about Maryland is they still have yet to lose away from home this year.
And I think I can actually pull up Maryland's profile here as I've finally gotten my computer problems.
All right, good.
There we go. I've been working on this here. Yes, the only losses were home to Pittsburgh and Nebraska, win at Michigan this weekend, but the strength of schedule a little bit weak there. That's probably the biggest issue I have with them. But John T., let me ask the question that we asked. Who
Playing Indiana's not going to help.
Who would you think the biggest surprise and disappointments are in the Big Ten so far this year?
I think surprise-wise, we got a team coached by our good friend Tim Miles that hasn't made the tourney since 2011. They've beaten Dayton, they've beaten Indiana, they've beaten Maryland, they've beaten Iowa. The Cornhuskers are my surprise. As far as disappointment, I think the Spartans. If you look back a year ago tomorrow, they beat Penn State last January 10th to improve to 16-1, one of the best teams in the country. This weekend, they come to the Palestra, where all teams come to lose, lost to Penn State. They're 11-6. Obviously, last year and this year are different years, but it's, I think, very disappointing to see how far the Spartans have fallen.
Matt, do you agree with him on those two picks?
I disagree a little bit. I mean, Nebraska, they're still just 9-7. I mean, they have some nice wins in the 9, but they also did lose at home to Gardner-Webb. We mentioned before, I'd have Minnesota as my biggest surprise, to where I thought maybe they'd be fringe NIT, and now they're right on the line for a protected seed. And then biggest disappointment, even though I didn't love them, Indiana being kind of in this position to where they're not a lock for the tournament yet and might not be at all even in March.
Yeah, David, this Indiana team, they beat Kansas, great. They beat North Carolina, great. But it's just, is it really there?
Well, one of the things that, I think it is, because if you look at their losses, I mean, you're talking Louisville, protected seed probably. You have Wisconsin, who is a Big Ten frontrunner. You have Nebraska, who's probably a protected seed, maybe a 1 seed, probably a Final Four team. And so you can't really fault them for those 3 losses. But I think as good as they looked the other night, I think they've got it turned around, and they're going to start – I think they have a rather high ceiling that they don't always play up to. But I think they'll play up to it enough to at least – I'll be shocked if Indiana doesn't make the field. I think they're at least good enough to do that.
I'm surprised you guys haven't mentioned Ohio State as far as a possible disappointment. I mean, granted that they've opened the Big Ten schedule at Illinois, at home against Purdue, and at Minnesota, but usually modest teams would usually get at least 1, if not 2 wins out of that schedule. But with, I think it's Bates Diop, who's now going to be out for the rest of the year. I mean, the Buckeyes are really going to be hamstrung now to cobble bits and pieces together as far as getting wins in what is a deceptively strong Big Ten this year.
Well, let me go over to these key upcoming games here. We can take a look at the list, including tomorrow night's Indiana. May find out just how good they are. So they'll try to win at Maryland and be the 3rd team to do that basically already this year. John T., what games are you looking at coming up this week, though?
I'm looking at the Spartans. They're going to get a chance to see if they can handle the big surprise. Minnesota travels there Wednesday night. And on the weekend, Sunday, they go to Ohio State, who is a bit of a disappointment. So they're certainly good enough to beat both of them. But if you lose to Minnesota at home, I think as much as that says about Minnesota being a good surprise, which I'll give Matt that credit, I think it says more about the Spartans, and this is just not their year.
Yeah, and I believe that these last 3 games are all Sunday games, not Saturday games. I apologize for that error there on the screen. But David, what about Northwestern? A real chance to pick up 2 more wins this week at Rutgers and home to Iowa.
And I like this Northwestern team. And we've liked them in the past, but I don't think we've ever believed them to be this far inside the bubble. Real nice win in Nebraska this past weekend. And in all seriousness, Nebraska, I don't know if they're going to hold on and make the tournament or not, but I do think that they are a bit of a home court hero, or they can be, and it's not the easiest place to win. Real nice win for Northwestern. Their profile is pretty good, and I think that they're far enough inside to where they're looking at the 8-9 line right now.
Northwestern better not sleep on Rutgers, because I think outside of the Penn State game at home, I've actually been pleasantly surprised at how the Scarlet Knights have played. They had a decent shot of winning at Iowa, but just were not able to finish that one in the closing minutes.
Yeah, I think we're watching different teams, but before we go any further, John T., do we have an update on the football game?
We're starting the second quarter. Alabama's up 7-0, and their defense is killing it. Sean Watson is going nowhere fast. It's early, but the Alabama defense looks like a dominant team.
So in other words, no shock.
0.
Let's move over to the Big 12 here, and Taitel, let me stick with you here on our new number one team in the nation, undefeated, the Baylor Bears, this past week knocking off both Iowa State by 2 and then beating Oklahoma State. Is this team going to be the team that finally knocks Kansas off the throne in the Big 12?
I want them to, because Kansas wins every year, and it's nice. As much as I like tradition and consistency, it's nice to have a little new blood. If you look at Baylor's schedule, not only are they winning all of them, obviously, they have 15 wins right now. 10 of them are over teams that really have a good shot of making the tourney. I don't know what the record is for number of wins against teams that made the tourney, but like 20 wins against tourney teams is in play. It's amazing.
Yeah, David, look at that. They have taken care of Oregon. They've beaten VCU, Michigan State, Louisville, Xavier, Oklahoma, Texas Southern, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and John Brown.
Yeah, John Brown, possible tournament team this year. What division are they in?
I don't know, like the NCCAA. I don't know. But
yeah.
But David's on a more serious note, Kansas was another one of my one seeds this weekend. Quite honestly, when I was looking at the profiles, I think they're very close to Baylor, believe it or not.
Oh, I do as well, and I think
they also have a decent shot to do what Xavier did last year in the.
I thought I asked David.
But it's they're really good. They lost their opener in double overtime, I think, as Taitel pointed out last week, and they haven't lost since. I think that they're actually better than Baylor. I'm expecting them to finish first again, but Baylor, one of the biggest surprises, not just in the conference, but of the year so far, starting off unranked, really not even close to the rankings. And they're just having a magnificent year. I know we kind of talked about it at the top of the show, but the overall program that has been built there, and 2 Elite Eights, a lot of NCAA tournament success, and now the number one ranking and a chance to get a number one seed and go deep into the tournament again.
Yeah, and Matt, Kansas State played a heck of a game against Kansas last week, losing by 2 points, 90-88. And suddenly people think that despite the loss, this K-State team is for real.
I was going to say Baylor has a shot to do something similar to it.
I think we're having audio problems with Stalika.
Yeah.
All right. But Matt, are you there?
Yeah, I think I am.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, let me throw that question over to you about the Kansas State.
Well, I kind of think they are, even though I know they played a hideous non-conference schedule, and their one chance they blew an opportunity to beat an overrated Maryland team.
My name is not Matt.
What? Okay, more audio.
Yeah, John, Stalika, we got to get your audio cleared up here.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt, can you go ahead?
But yeah, but I think this is a big week for them. At Texas Tech, I have a fellow team in the similar boat, and then Baylor at home, who probably will be coming off a loss in West Virginia. So could they get 1 or 2 wins this week? I think it would be a long way to proving they are a legit tournament team. They go 0-2, and suddenly they look like a fraud because they played no one out of the league. I think, yeah, as long as they don't let the Kansas result get them down, and I believe they won their weekend game. So I think they have a chance to at least go 1-1 this week to keep in the tournament conversation and then Bruce Weber keep his job conversation.
Yeah. Well, John T., let me bring you back in here on two other teams sitting here both at 1-2 in the conference. That's both Texas Tech and TCU. Good overall records, but is there any meat to these profiles? And are these teams that you think could contend for tournament bids?
They can contend, certainly. The Big 12 is loaded this year, so if you finish in the top half, you are under consideration. TCU, not a lot of meat in terms of wins, but the losses are great. SMU, Kansas, and West Virginia. I know two of those teams will make it, and I think the third will. As far as Texas Tech, a huge overtime win at home against West Virginia is the star of the show. That is going to carry a lot of weight in March. Kansas lost by double digits on the road is not going to hurt them too bad. Loss at Iowa State shouldn't hurt them. Neutral site 2-point loss to Auburn is going to hurt them because Auburn is going nowhere fast.
Right, and I just pulled up that first profile, the TCU one, and Dave, this is the problem I know you had with it, and I think I'm agreeing with you here.
As you should.
Where's the wins?
Yeah, and that's just it. I mean, their best – they have a bunch of home bye wins. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm impressed with what they've done this year and how much they've improved. I mean, this is a team that was really, really bad for a long period of time, and I think that you're starting to see some some energy getting behind that. And I think they're definitely heading in the right direction. But as far as making the tournament this year, much less looking like a tournament team at present, I don't think they do.
Salika, I think we've got you back here. So let me throw the next question to you of who is your biggest surprise and your biggest disappointment in the Big 12?
I would say probably as far as pleasant surprises go, it would be TCU because I think they're on the Texas Tech trajectory from last year where they didn't really do anything out of conference except pad the win total. But if they can get a few quality wins from the trio of Baylor, Kansas, and West Virginia, they should be able to sneak in. But as far as biggest disappointment goes, I probably would say Texas right here, given the expectations we've had under Shaka Smart.
Well, John T., Texas, are they the biggest disappointment, or do you want to talk about Oklahoma being a Final Four national championship, national semifinals last year?
Oklahoma has really taken a turn for the worse, but I'll agree with John. It's Texas. I actually think it's not – I mean, it is close. Oklahoma's having a bad year, but when you look at the Longhorns last year, Shaka's debut season in Austin, 20 wins. It literally took a half-court buzzer beater by Northern Iowa to knock them out of the tournament. They bring in a McDonald's All-American center in Jared Allen, and this team is 7-8 with a home loss to Kent State. That's disappointing.
David, the upcoming games this weekend, you could circle this one tomorrow night as absolutely huge. Baylor at West Virginia. Is this when they go down?
Yes. I don't think they get it done there. And, again, Baylor is having an amazing year, but they've had to sweat out their last two games at home. Oklahoma State, who is, while good, not nearly as good as West Virginia, and they're not playing them at home. Same with Iowa State. I think it ends tomorrow, but, I mean, they've been very surprising up till this point. We'll see what they do. It's going to be a fun game to watch. With you got the press against West Virginia, or the press that West Virginia brings against Baylor's athleticism. It should be a lot of fun.
Matt, is there any other upcoming games in the Big 12 that you're really looking at?
And so I guess I bring up Baylor again after having to go to West Virginia. Now K-State, which for Baylor to prove are they one seed quality, figure they probably do lose on Tuesday. And K-State, are they a tournament team? I think that's a huge game for both of them for the top of the bracket and the bottom of the bracket.
We just want to very briefly note here, Kansas and Oklahoma tomorrow night, a lot different than when these two teams played this early in the season last year, when they were both ranked number one in the nation and put together maybe the best regular season game I've ever seen in my life, triple overtime.
It's one of the best games I've ever seen in like the last 3 or 4 years of any kind. It was phenomenal.
I don't expect that game again this year, though.
Yeah.
Let's take a look over to the Pac-12. And Salika, if you're still with us here, let me start with you. And
I am.
And the news here on Dylan Brooks pulling a Grayson Allen.
Well, in some ways, it's actually a little bit worse than what Grayson Allen has did, but if you actually saw the play, he went down kind of awkward on his right leg, but actually extended it in such a way that he actually ended up kicking a nearby Washington State player in the package. So needless to say, he was given a flagrant 2 and an ejection, but I don't think any further action is going to be pending unless he does something similar to this in the future.
And John T., as far as what actually happened on the court besides that, one of the most notable, many notable wins this week, not too many surprises in the Pac-12, although your Arizona Wildcats a fairly nice win over Colorado.
Fairly nice indeed. I remember somebody on this panel thought Colorado belonged in the tournament or something, I recall last week.
That's Griggs down there. That's Griggs.
No, Arizona's my surprise team. I love them, obviously, because I'm biased. But we're talking about a team that in August they had a McDonald's All-American in Terrence Ferguson who decided he'd rather play professionally in Australia. They were bringing back star shooting guard Alonzo Trier. He hasn't played a single minute this year. The team that's 15-2, possibly and arguably Sean Miller's best coaching job ever. He's got 3 freshmen scoring in double digits in Markkanen, Alkins, and Simmons. Once Ferguson left and Trier didn't start, I assumed this was going to be a good team. They're really bordering on great.
Let me bring you here to another team that had the other game probably of note from the Pac-12 this weekend was last night where Cal went into USC, picked up a 1-point win, a real nice finish, real good game. USC, we're not doing frauder for real tonight, but do you want to do a quick one with them?
Yeah, I am leaning toward fraud. With the one thing, when they get Buddy Boatwright back, I think he would help them. The game I watched, the USC-Oregon game, Shaquan Aaron did not look like he belonged at a Pac-12 court. So you get Boatwright back, who was pretty proven as a freshman, limit Aaron's minutes to 10 or 15 off the bench, and that might make them at least a tournament-level team. Not that that's a real high bar to clear this year. And in a Pac-12, you figure a 4th or maybe a 5th get in.
Well, 4th or 5th get in. So what about are you looking at Cal now? Did this put Cal back on the map? They even got a vote in the coaches poll today.
Yeah, reluctantly. I don't think they're any good. They don't play an entertaining style. I mean, I don't know what they would quite end in the tournament, but you got to put 68 teams in now, and that will be a pretty decent win.
David, I think I agree with Titel that Arizona's maybe is the biggest surprise. Would you agree with him, or is there somebody else you think is the biggest surprise and the biggest disappointment here?
To me, personally, it's UCLA. I was not expecting them to be good, much less as good as they are. And it's funny enough. I think it's to the point to where I like them a lot less by a mile than anyone else before the season started, and now I think I like them more than anyone else. I've just been really impressed with them. They would be my biggest surprise, but Arizona is right there. USC overall, I realize that they're not on the level that UCLA and Arizona are on, but this is for the last 2 years in October. We were talking, last October, about 14, 15 months ago, we were talking, would Andy Enfield even keep his job? He got them to the NCAA tournament last year. This year, we weren't expecting them to really do much. I thought they'd be doing good to get to the NIT. And while they've dropped 2 of their last 3, I think that they're a lot better than what we were expecting. He took over and inherited a big mess, and I think he's done a great job cleaning it up to the point to where USC is a tournament caliber program now under him. So in the long term, I think that's one of the better coaching jobs over the last 3 or 4 years. Talking about this season, I think UCLA is my biggest surprise.
Stalika, who is your biggest disappointment here? And if you say Washington, I'm going to mute you.
Funny thing is, I actually have no problem saying Washington is my biggest disappointment given some of the talent that they brought in.
Okay, time out. We need to go back to the preseason podcast because Washington is doing exactly what I said what they would do. David, I think you agreed with me there. But I agree with the talent, obviously. Yes, sorry, Slicky.
But the thing is, if we're going to go on the other side of the equation, if we're talking about pleasant surprises, I think I'm actually going to say Utah. I wish they had scheduled a lot better than what they did at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, they are having.
Well, I mean, I would argue that the biggest disappointment is Colorado, just because I really thought
Yes.
they'd be there this year. But John T, he mentioned this Utah team, and this is a team that when I put my bracket together, I took a long, hard look at them because there are 3 losses: Butler at home, at Xavier, at Arizona. Oh, and the San Francisco loss, but we'll ignore that. But nothing on the good side. Is this just almost we're sitting here in the middle of January and it's still too early to tell?
First of all, priorities. Alabama now up 14-0 with 9.5 left in the second quarter. Secondly, Utah's in an interesting situation where they're getting better as the season goes on, not because they have freshmen who are growing, because they're adding upperclassmen. Sophomore Cedric Bearfield, junior David Collette. These are guys who transferred in and are finally healthy and eligible, and they're becoming like 2 of the best players on the team. I think that Utah is really a sleeper to make the tourney. I don't think they're in right now, and it's hard to explain away a neutral site loss to San Francisco even by 3 points. But when your other 3 losses are Butler, Xavier, and Arizona, that's a good little schedule. Not a lot of meat yet, but they got USC and UCLA at home coming up this week, Thursday and Saturday. I think they can beat USC. I don't know about UCLA just because their offense is so amazing, but I think I want to pick the upset with Utah to beat USC.
I think they lost to San Francisco just so they could get one more true road win against Hawaii to pad their total.
Yeah,
There we go. Yeah, and I think those are probably the 2 best-looking games coming this week as well. Those USC and UCLA games at Utah. Maybe USC at Colorado. They may really need that game to just get some meat on their schedule. Let's turn quickly over to the SEC, though. And, David, let me start it off with you, where Kentucky picked up the win over Arkansas, still seems to be cruising along here.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that I'm expecting them to run the table, but it would not surprise me if they did. They are so much better than everybody else. They're ranked 6th. They might be underrated, which is weird to say about a team that's ranked as high as 6th. They are phenomenally good. Keep in mind, like 13-2 overall. Their losses, one of them was on the road against Louisville, who may not lose at home this year. And I'm blanking on who their other one was, too. UCLA, yes, at home. Okay, my mistake. I knew that.
And John T, I don't think he's going to play, but some interesting news of this out of Kentucky is Hamidou Diallo. I don't know if you heard about this or not, but he enrolled in the school. He's one of the top prospects coming in for next year. Finished up at high school, is technically eligible to start playing immediately if he wanted to start playing. I don't know that Calipari is going to play him, but we discussed this last week, I believe, this some new trend of high school kids suddenly starting in the middle of the year.
It is a new trend, which, frankly, I don't love. Auburn guy, I believe Wiley came in, and he started out like the same week. If Diallo comes in, it seems like from what I've read that he's not going to play. He might even redshirt, which it seems weird. Like you're going to leave high school early to go to college and redshirt so you don't play. It's odd. There must be more layers that I'm not getting. But if the point is that getting to college sooner makes you get to the NBA sooner, that makes sense. If the point is getting out of high school and becoming a Kentucky basketball player, looks good on your resume and looks good on everything, like I get that too.
Yeah, and I don't quite understand the red shirt either, because who cares if this kid burns a year of eligibility, because he's not going to play more than one season, and he's technically under the rules because of his age. He's actually NBA draft eligible after this season ends, so he may not play at all for Kentucky. But Matt, do you have a biggest surprise and the biggest disappointment so far in the SEC?
I'm going to say Florida, and I think actually their Ken Pop ranking of 14 is a little more accurate even than the coaches ranking of 23, and that for a year or two of not necessarily inheriting a mess, but like inheriting a really successful program with great expectations that was in so-so shape, and having the back of the top 15, I think legitimately a really good team, kind of similar to the Arkansas team 2 years ago where, yes, the conference is not good, but there's another good team besides Kentucky.
David, do you have a big disappointment here?
Texas A&M. I mean, I really liked them before the year. I liked what they did out of conference. What in the hell has happened to them in the last week or two? Good God.
Yeah, this team really struggling, pretty much dropping off of everybody's radar. And Stalika, let me begin here as we take a look at some of the upcoming games this week in the SEC. Is there any specific game that really stands out? when you look at this?
I'm looking at the two games that Florida is playing. They're going on the road to Alabama, who themselves is off to a 2-0 start. And then they're going to be hosting Georgia at the Swamp on Saturday. Interesting to see if they can keep pace with Kentucky in the SEC race.
And thanks for mentioning Georgia, because I almost went past the SEC without bringing this up. David, Missouri and Georgia had a fight not between players, but ended up being between coaches this week, and a pretty ugly incident there.
Yeah,
got a little news about it, though, actually, don't you?
Yeah, a little bit of a dust-up. I think what happened was that there was a tie-up for a loose ball that turned out to be meaningless. One guy, I forget, got a little over-aggressive. The coaches came out to break it up, and it looked like it's just you violate the rule of when you go out there, you go after your guys. Like, let the other coaches go after their guys. And I think that they kind of got tangled up in that, and that they were going after the wrong guys. Little bit of a shoving match, a lot of shouting, nothing too serious. I think technical fouls were issued. It was something that I think the coaches were a little bit embarrassed about on both sides after it happened. More embarrassing than it was ugly, for real. But I since learned what started it is that a Georgia coach made a comment that said, we would rather be playing Kansas, and then the Missouri coaches just blew their stack.
I really thought you had news here.
Like went through the roof.
Mute. All right, you're done. let me go over to let's turn over to the American. And John T, we had a coaching change in the American, way down at the bottom, but it's always strange to have a midseason coaching change. Orlando Antigua out at South Florida, and brought in at least a name off of their bench, Murray Bardo taking over.
I was pleasantly surprised. I got the pleasure of interviewing Coach Barlow a few years ago at his previous school, and nothing but a nice guy, great bloodlines with his father, Gene, as a legendary coach himself. I don't think he's going to succeed early just because the team is in a bit of turmoil, and I think there's hints and whispers of scandals and stuff. But he seems like a good guy, and I think that if anybody can turn it around, this is a good place to try to make that happen.
And Matt, do you have a biggest surprise and disappointment in the American?
Well, let's see. I guess, disappointment, UConn. Surprise, I'm going to say SMU with Larry Brown. And then in bold prediction time that, of course, I'll be wrong, knowing how I am with coaches, I think Angry Frank might be the new coach in South Florida.
What?
You think Frank Martin would leave South Carolina to go to South Florida?
Solely because it's home. And I know who was it, Brian Snow, one of the national recruiting writers on Twitter from Scout, was insinuating a high major coach had interest in that opening. So,
and let me just correct you. You said SMU without. Did you say SMU without Larry Brown?
Yeah, SMU without Larry Brown. Yeah.
Okay. Thought I misheard you there for a second. But let's take a look at some of these upcoming games. In fact, David. SMU at Cincinnati. That's probably the biggest game easily of the week here.
Yeah, the two teams that are solidly inside the bubble. What's Temple doing this week? Because my biggest surprise.
Temple's at UConn, and then they're hosting Tulsa.
Yeah, my biggest surprise of the year was going to be Temple, and what a great start they got off to winning the preseason NIT. And my biggest disappointment was going to be Temple and what they've done pretty much in every game.
That's a pretty good way to put it.
I actually like to take a look at what Memphis is going to be doing this week. They're going to Tulsa to face Frank Hate's bunch, and then they also get a very winnable game at home against South Florida. These should be two very winnable games for Tubby Smith's crew.
Yes. Whenever Frank Haith is not the biggest disappointment in anything, then something is really disappointing. I mean, and that's where UConn is right now.
And I just pulled up this Memphis profile here. Interesting. No really bad losses. I mean, Monmouth and Providence are mediocre losses. But again, missing anything on the good side other than the South Carolina at home. And other than SMU and Cincinnati, they're not really going to have those chances. And if we look at their upcoming schedule here, they do get both of them on the road at least. But they probably have to win both those games if this team can actually contend for a tournament bid.
Yeah, win both of those and pretty much all the rest of them too.
Well, and then we also had the debate last week is how much credit will they get for beating a shorthanded South Carolina team at home?
Yeah, true.
John T., let's go over to the Atlantic 10 here. And Dayton is a team that had a very good week this week, pick up wins against both St. Bonaventure and Rhode Island.
Yeah, 12-3 overall. 3 possible tourney teams that they've lost to are St. Mary's by 4, Nebraska by 2, and Northwestern by 3. It's like 10 points away from being undefeated. The Rhode Island win was big. It's at home. You can't lose conference games at home and expect to have the voters reward you or the selection committee reward you. And a pretty cupcake schedule coming up until they go to VCU on January 27th. So I fully expect them to be 7-0 when they head down to Richmond in what could be the A-10 game of the year.
Maybe it should be. And then the return trip again coming up March 1st. Matt, do you have a biggest surprise and biggest disappointment in the A-10?
Yeah, surprise. I'll go. I guess LaSalle, given their history now that they're 2-1 in the league, they've got some talent. Now, probably more disappointment is UMass. That is a roster that has some high major level players in there. Brashad Grisham, Dejan Giroux, I think Chris Baldwin could play at a high major. And they're now sitting at 0-3 in a not real good A-10. Like, I know Derek Kellogg isn't a great coach, but I don't think with that talent he has, they should be at 0-3 and even 10-6 overall.
This is going to be my turn to call a timeout right here. If I'm going to be chastised for calling Washington a disappointment, I better not hear Fordham as a disappointment because that would imply that I actually had expectations for them in the first place.
I would actually lead towards Rhode Island because I thought they'd be even better than this, and they're looking at it best as a bubble team right now. But David?
Yeah. Well, my biggest disappointment is the Atlantic 10. I mean,
that's the good way to put it.
Even the good teams in it, minus Dayton, and even Dayton, I mean, had they been able to win at least one of those games against a tournament caliber team, if you were to collectively add up the total number of wins this conference has amassed against teams that are likely to make the tournament, I don't know what it is, but I know it's a very small number. Like VCU not doing much. Rhodey, a team that we thought would be in the rankings, now probably outside the bubble. And just nobody doing anything. GW, a big disappointment, albeit a lot of that off-the-court issues probably contributing to a lot of that. But this is a league that normally has its champion wearing white, at the very least way inside the bubble, and it normally puts 3 or 4 teams in. And right now, it's just not looking that way. It's just a very bad year for a conference that's typically much better than this.
Right. And just quickly look at some of the key upcoming games. Probably the highlight game here is this VCU at Davidson game. Tough road test for VCU against a tough Davidson team, not a tournament caliber Davidson team, but a tough team.
Yeah.
And just a quick note here, Fordham and St. Bonaventure being played in Rochester, New York, at a little out of the ordinary game here coming up on Saturday. Let's look at one more conference, the West Coast Conference. Nothing of note happened this week. St. Mary's won easily took care of San Francisco. Gonzaga didn't even play this weekend. Their game got postponed due to some really bad weather issues up there in Portland. But John T., let me start with you. Is there a big surprise and a big disappointment in the West Coast Conference, or is there not even one here?
I think you can go biggest disappointments. BYU, like there was a lot of talk, I think, amongst us that this might be a 3-headed monster of a conference. And you said St. Mary's didn't do anything this week. They beat BYU at home by double digits, which is just a game in January. But I think it kind of shows that Gonzaga and St. Mary's are really a step up here, while BYU is coming down for the rest of the conference. I also think Gonzaga, it's hard to say they're a surprise because Matt picked them to be like a top 2 seed, and he's looking brilliant for that pick, by the way.
Yeah.
The schedule and the wins. It's one thing to go undefeated in West Coast Conference play. Beat Florida, Iowa State, Arizona, arguably Tennessee. We won't mention Washington, like San Diego State's having an off year, but quality wins from Mark Few's squad.
And Matt, the big, huge game coming up this weekend in the West Coast Conference, one of the 2 games of the year.
Yeah, so this is one, as much as love I've had for Gonzaga, it would not stun me, given the circumstances, to see St. Mary's go into the Kennel and win.
It would stun the hell out of me.
Really, David?
Yes, St. Mary's is very good, but I think winning at Gonzaga, it's kind of like winning on the road against Kansas, Kentucky, Arizona. It is a absolute snake pit. If St. Mary's gets them, it'll be at St. Mary's. I think Gonzaga wins fairly handily Saturday. It's just very, very, very hard to win there.
Also, keep in mind, last year St. Mary's actually swept Gonzaga during the regular season, but ended up losing the conference title game to Gonzaga and ultimately knocked them out of the NCAA tournament. We'll see if there's a bit of a revenge factor in play for this weekend.
Yeah, real down year for Gonzaga last year. And what did they lose? 3 home games? I mean, they just don't lose at home.
And John T., we have another score update.
We've got some action going on. Clemson with a nice 8-yard touchdown run by Deshaun Watson around the left end. Extra point is good. They're now down 14-7, and we have a ball game.
Well, while we normally,
I'm also watching the replay of Nebraska Northwestern. If you'd like me to update you on.
Okay, we actually have kind of thrown the Mountain West Conference out of this podcast. I do just want to very briefly mention them though, because of a game that happened over the weekend. David, I think you stayed up till about 3:00 in the morning watching this Nevada New Mexico game.
It was unlike anything. I just had it on in the background while I was doing some other work, and in the second half, I think New Mexico led by 25. If it wasn't quite 25, it was
25.
Okay, it was 25, and it was a clusing like none other. With a minute to go, or at least like a minute and change, like a minute and 10 seconds, they were down by 14-15. They hit 5 threes in this stretch. 2 of them banked in, one of which tied the game to force overtime. And then in the last minute of overtime, they were down by 5. Again, drained 2 threes to get the win. It was one of the most improbable, exciting wins ever. I think the fans were stunned. They were booing New Mexico, booing the rest, booing the situation, booing Nevada. I don't know, but it kind of was important because, like we said in the email thread today, if anyone from the Mountain West is going to land inside the bubble or at least on it, I think it's Nevada. And in order to do that, they needed to win that game at New Mexico. So they're at large hopes, barely flickering with really what was not just an exciting win, but an important win for a team that has a razor-thin margin for error to get inside the bubble.
I want to read off some stats for this game. They were 25 points down in the second half. That was the 8th largest comeback from a second-half deficit in NCAA history. 9 3-pointers in those last few minutes and in the overtime combined. Some of them, if you can catch the highlights, absolutely insane shots that were just thrown up there.
Yeah,
Guys in their face and just banked in from well beyond the 3-point line. It was also the largest comeback in NCAA history from the deficit that they were down at the 5-minute mark. And just coincidentally, this was Nevada's first ever win at the pit in New Mexico. So a hell of a way to get it. But
wow.
On that note,
You may also want to check out the graph at Ken Pop's page.
Yeah, they basically had 0 chance to win the game and somehow did so. But on that note, let me go through each of you, see if there's any other final thoughts on the evening. And Matt, let me start with you.
I would say, I think I brought it up in our email thread earlier, but the KenPom projected standings in the Big 12 currently have the top 3, West Virginia, Kansas, and Baylor, all going 13-5. And then we have realistic Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Kansas State all at 9-9, and all playing, I believe, non-conference schedules rated 270 or lower on KenPom. Boy, with that, I think in a league like that, normally if you get to 500, you're in good shape. But normally having a non-conference schedule like that can be an anchor. So you have that, and then you have the other team that I'm still kind of intrigued by, Oklahoma State, only at 7-11. At 8-10, they're definitely at 9-9. I think they're in. At 7-11, probably not. So could be a setting up maybe 3 or 4 bids only for the Big 12 still, quite possibly, even though they are the number 1 league at KenPom, and you think they're going to get 5 or 6.
I personally just comment on that. I think the number 1 league because of Kansas and Baylor just carrying everybody else, being 2 of the top 3 teams in the country, in my opinion. But John T., any other final thoughts from you?
We got to give a shout out to Gino this week. John Wooden back in 1974 ended up winning by that year 88 wins in a row for UCLA, including a couple national titles en route, before getting upset by Digger Phelps and Notre Dame. Gino Auriemma broke that record in 2010 by finishing a 90-game winning streak. Tomorrow, Tuesday, he could tie his own record by winning 90 in a row again in a 7-year period, and then he can try to break the record Saturday in a trip to SMU. It's one thing to say he's a great coach. He's really entering like best coach ever territory. I used to think Pat Summitt had that record wrapped up for the women's game. I think Gino is arguably caught her. And as much as I think Wooden and Krzyzewski are 1-2 on the men's side, he's really doing things we've never seen before. A pair of 90-game winning streaks is this far away.
One day we should have a debate over whether or not he would be as successful if he was coaching on the men's side. I think it would be an interesting debate to have. Stalika.
Oh, sorry.
It's been a while since we've had some Arizona State news, but if you caught the end of the Colorado-Arizona State game, Bobby Hurley had some pretty nice comments post-game, and I'll paraphrase by saying, if you're going to win on the Arizona side of your road trip, you better go to bleeping Tucson. That comment actually bit them in the ass because Utah would come in a couple nights later and actually win at Arizona State.
And they're playing Arizona this week, too. So, yeah, they may get really taken down for that. David.
First, real quick, to build on what John Teitel said, it isn't just the 90-game winning streak. It's how many of those have come against highly ranked teams. Of the first streak of 90, 30 of the 90 were against top 25 teams. That's, to me, that adds to the amazement. And yes, I think he is one of the best coaches, if not the best, men's or women's, in college basketball. Secondly, with what happened with Grayson Allen, you had observed that I didn't want to talk about it. And I think a sports writer of all people, when I read something that Greg Doyle actually wrote, he sort of pinpointed what it was that I don't like about things like this. And he called the reaction on the internet and on social media a tsunami of gleeful hate. And I'm like, that's what it is I don't like about things like this. Was what he did wrong? Yes, of course it was. Should he have been disciplined? Yes, of course. But this tsunami of hate, this everybody up on their soapbox talking about how awful it was and how Duke needs to do something, and so in Coach K, that's what it is I don't like about it. That's kind of why I kind of like Hoops HD. We steer clear of the tsunami of hate. And while I would have punished him, and probably even more than Duke did, I just don't want to hear 1,000 different people signing off on how evil he is and how evil Duke is. And, it's not easy. What would your life look like if you lived in a fishbowl and everybody got to critique you? So I just wanted to throw that out there that's why I kind of cringed when I saw it, because I knew for a week we'd be dealing with, as Greg Doyle put it, a tsunami of hate.
Well, my final comment, actually, I want to do a shout out here and send out our best wishes to Dave Luce, the head coach at Austin Peay. He's been coaching there since, I think, before time began. One of the longest tenured coaches in Division I. And he did leave the team this week. He is undergoing chemotherapy and don't know when he'll be able to get back to coach again. So we do want to send our best wishes out to him, his family, and the whole Austin Peay family. But on behalf of David Griggs, Matt Zakowski, John Slika, John Teitel, we want to wish everybody to have fun enjoying the rest of this national championship game, and we will talk to you again real soon.